Is Brian Kelly and LSU football as a whole taking the right approach to roster construction?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all of the above. Plus, you can also check us out on YouTube as well. Locked On LSU. Hit that subscribe button and you'll get notified as soon as new episodes of the Locked On LSU podcast drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. So it is a Wednesday, so you know what that means. It is Mailbag Wednesday, and we are right to your comments, your messages, your questions, your concerns, all of the above, just things that I've noticed, things that you've sent in to me throughout the last week that I think is worthy of answering or breaking down into a little bit more detail. So for those who are new, welcome. Happy that you're here. We do this every single week. So if there's something that you want me to discuss on the podcast, a question that you want me to answer or address, feel free to send those questions in. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to comment below. You can send me DMs on Twitter at CarolineFenton1 or however you want to send those questions in. I am all ears, and I'm back next Wednesday with another Mailbag Wednesday. So let's get into it. First and foremost, there was a question, not rather a question, more so a comment that I wanted to dive into a little bit deeper, because the point that this person is making is not a bad one, and it's a very fair point to bring up. But I just want to break it down because I think that it's important to remember that everything that you knew about roster construction, maybe not everything, but a lot of what you knew about roster construction, maybe in the previous era of college football, it no longer applies here. And it's an incredibly applicable question now because we are right in the thick of the spring transfer portal window. So Jed Olivier commented on a video last week, says it doesn't pay to recruit players when you're constantly adding players at their position through the portal. Who knows? Maybe Kai Pran and Ryan Yates might still be on the team if they didn't add Xavion Thomas, CJ Daniels, and Jordan Gilbert to the roster during the last portal window. There was literally no need for added depth at these positions. So this was a comment on an episode where we were breaking down some transfer portal entries from LSU's roster. Like you heard, Kai Pran, the former 4-star wide receiver out of Louisiana. Like you also heard Ryan Yates, who played in 13 games this past season at the safety position. He has entered the transfer portal. And I mentioned on that podcast, I said, I feel like that is probably the biggest hit to this roster is Ryan Yates. It's DB. It's an already thin position. It's a position of need. And it's a player that you're losing that has experience. And you would probably guess, or at least I would venture to guess, you would get a decent bit of playing time this season. So here is my response to that comment. And anytime that there's any comments or concerns or questions that are submitted, this is not me picking on anybody. This is just truly wholeheartedly a discussion. So the idea of, well, if you didn't address those positions in the transfer portal, then those players probably never would have left. That's true. Maybe to a certain extent, possibly, but you don't know that. You constantly have to be taking care of positions and not just assuming that everybody's going to stick around. Like I always say, the transfer portal giveth. Like the transfer portal can be a wonderful tool at your disposal, but the transfer portal works both ways. The transfer portal also taketh away. So you cannot just rest on the laurels of the roster that you have currently in place is the roster that you're going to have 6 months from now, 1 year from now, hell, even 2. How in the world could you project what your roster looks like 2 years from now? Think about what the LSU roster looked like 2 years ago. Wildly different. So one, those players never would have transferred if you never went into the transfer portal and addressed those positions, maybe, but also maybe not. And you don't want to find yourself in a position where the transfer portal is taking away more than it is supplementing to your roster. The second point to that is that I would say is you can always upgrade your roster. now that college football roster construction now mimics more of NFL roster construction, where recruiting is kind of like the draft and the transfer portal is kind of like free agency, you can kind of start to use principles of NFL roster construction and apply them to college football roster construction. I always say in the NFL, you can always upgrade your roster, always. Just because you have a starter at that position doesn't mean that you don't have to or can't address that position in free agency or the draft. I would venture to guess a majority of you listening are Saints fans. You might say, well, why would the Saints go out and get a quarterback in this year's draft, or at least try to trade up to get a quarterback? They have Derek Carr. Yeah, and Derek Carr stinks. So if you can find a better option at quarterback, you pursue that option. It's the same thing here. Yes, Kai Brian is a young and up-and-coming and promising wide receiver, but Brian Kelly might be evaluating his roster and say, well, we need more guys with experience that can help us right now, that can help us tomorrow. And that's what CJ Daniels and Xavier Thomas brings. CJ Daniels with a huge year last year. Xavier Thomas, a Louisiana kid who has a SEC experience that probably didn't even scratch the surface of what he's capable of doing just simply because of the offense that he was in last season at Mississippi State. So Brian Kelly may have looked at it and said, look, if I have to sacrifice some of these young and up-and-coming receivers in order to add and help my team right now, that's just frankly what I have to do, because that's the reality of the situation that we're living in the transfer portal. Is you don't always have the gift of depth. Think about the Alabama teams that were like the Alabama teams that were just wagons, that were constantly winning national championships, like 2010 to 2020. Let's look at that span. Nick Saban at Alabama. What separated Alabama from really everybody else? It was plug and play. That Alabama just had a deeper roster than anybody else. The players would stick around for 3 to 4 years and just ride the bench until it was their time, because they knew that when it was their time, they could win a national championship, would be a first or second round draft pick, so on and so forth. That doesn't exist anymore, because if a player is sticking around, especially a 4-star or a 5-star player is sticking around, they want to see the field in year 2. Look at Walker Howard. Why did he leave LSU? He wanted a path to at least see the field, and that didn't exist at LSU, so he left for Ole Miss. It's the same thing here, that when you could say, well, we're losing this young talent that we recruited in last year's recruiting class, why do we keep adding players at those positions in the transfer portal and just pushing those players away? It's because you need to help your roster right now in 2024. If Kai Brian wasn't going to be a solution or a consistent starter for this team until 2025 or 2026, you could make an argument that he was just wasting a roster spot. And I don't think that's the case, but I'm just saying that you can make that argument that, well, if he's not going to help the team right now, then I need to go find someone who is. And I need to create a scholarship spot for that player, just because depth isn't what it used to be. The other thing I would add to that is, we talk a lot on the NFL side of things of being in a Super Bowl window, in a win now mode, so to speak. That if you're a team like the Buffalo Bills or the Philadelphia Eagles or the San Francisco 49ers or the Kansas City Chiefs, they make moves a little bit differently than teams that aren't considered quote unquote contenders. I think LSU is a contender. LSU can win right now. Why not? They've got the quarterback that they feel, and frankly, I feel encouraged about. You've got one of the best, if not the best, offensive lines in the SEC. You've got a freaking, deeper than the ocean wide receiver room. You got questions defensively, absolutely, but you've got the makings of a national championship offense, at least. And I think that LSU views that as a quote-unquote win-now mode. We all feel that way, right? We all feel like LSU is in a win-now mode. We all, as fans, feel like LSU is in a position to get to Atlanta, to be in the expanded college football playoff, to be a 10-plus win team. So when you are in a quote-unquote win-now mode, which I think all of college football should be in that mindset, considering the shelf life of a college football coach is that of like an avocado, then you need to do what's best for the 2024 LSU Tigers. We'll address 25 and 26 whenever 25 and 26 comes around. It's all about right now, but I appreciate that comment and I appreciate that conversation. We'll continue with your mailbag questions coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. What a fun time in the sports calendar. Plus, baseball is in full swing. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and oh so easy to use. So I'm looking at the NHL playoffs. I follow the Nashville Predators. I cover the Nashville Predators. They had a rough game one against the Vancouver Canucks, but I expect a full comeback for the Nashville Predators. So I'm putting some money on the Preds to win game 3, the first game at home at Bridgestone Arena. So what are you waiting for? That's my take, but do it how you want to do it, and do it at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. And of course, we're part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. The Locked On NFL mock draft is available right now. So find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every single NFL franchise. There's live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL mock draft is available right now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, rolling along here with some of your mailbag questions. And this next question comes in from someone on Twitter, DM'd me on Twitter. So DMs are open. Feel free to send those in. One listener asks me, everyone's talking about how LSU needs to win more than 10 games. We've heard a lot of the players talking about that. I know Mason Taylor spoke with the media a few weeks ago. He said, look, 10 games isn't enough anymore. That's no longer the ceiling. So this listener asks, what if LSU wins 10 games again? Good question, because if we're talking about winning more than 10 games, if we're talking about how winning 10 games just isn't enough anymore, if we're talking about how Brian Kelly's won 10 games in his first 2 seasons, we want more. The bar is raised. And let me just point out how horribly spoiled I know that we all sound talking about how 10 wins isn't enough anymore. But look, welcome to LSU, welcome to the SEC. Expectations are high. That's why Brian Kelly came here, right? The expectations are high. The expectations are you don't continue doing what you've been doing the last 2 seasons. You're in year 3 now. You've been telling us that this team's ready for ascension. So it's a very fair question. But also keep in mind, just how in the last segment I talked about how college football is different in terms of roster construction. It's now basically just a war of attrition. Who can hold on to more of their players and who can supplement the most in the best way through the transfer portal? Who can be the most methodical in terms of roster construction? But I think we also have to think about how college football isn't just different in terms of NIL and the transfer portal, but the postseason is different now too. Where in the 4-game playoff structure, if you win 10 games, you're probably going to a near 6 bowl, but you lose 2 and you are out. You lose 2 games and you are out of consideration for the college football playoff. Hell, Florida State didn't even lose a single game and they were out of consideration for the college football playoff. So in the past, what we viewed 10 wins as, I think will be different what we view 10 wins as now because the playoff is expanded. Because there's now 12 teams in the college football playoff. So if LSU wins 10 games this season, LSU is probably a playoff team. So I understand that we're talking about how 10 wins isn't enough anymore. But I think an important distinction in that is LSU under Brian Kelly has never won 10 regular season games. LSU went 9-3 in back-to-back seasons, and they got that 10th win in a bowl game. But if LSU can win 10 regular season games, that's different to me than winning 9 regular season games plus a bowl win. Plus, if you win 10 regular season games, like I said, you're probably going to the playoff because those 10 wins are going to be really impressive wins. And those 2 losses more than likely are going to be, to use a committee word, quote unquote, quality losses. Let's just walk through LSU's schedule. USC, if you win that game, that's an impressive win. And we'll see, throughout the rest of the season what USC turns into, what Caleb Williams less USC looks like. But that's a big game. That's a Power 5. That's a Big Ten win. And then you got Nichols, you'll win that game. South Carolina, if you win that game, that's a SEC win. UCLA, another Big Ten win. South Alabama, that's a game that you should win. And then looking at this stretch of Ole Miss, who is the sexy team in the offseason based off of what Lane Kiffin has done in the transfer portal. Arkansas, who knows what they're going to look like this season, but another SEC win. Texas A&M, a very respected SEC win. Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, and then Vanderbilt should be, I don't want to, as I'm just a stone's throw away from Vanderbilt Stadium right now, it's a game that you should win. But looking at LSU's schedule, like there's some very quality wins in there. And let's say LSU's 2 losses. Let's just say, knock on wood. LSU drops games at home against Ole Miss and at home against Alabama. Those more than likely are very quality losses against 2 other teams that more than likely could be 10-plus win teams. So even in, and I know, I expect LSU to beat Ole Miss because that's the expectation. I expect LSU to beat Alabama this year because right now feels like a pretty good window to beat Alabama. But also, our feelings about these teams on April 24th might be very different than October 3rd because we just don't know exactly what these teams are going to look like come game time, come September once the season starts. We can talk about, this team won the transfer portal all you really want, but until you see that show up on the scoreboard, until you see that show up on game tape on Saturday evenings in the fall, like all of that means nothing. So a long way of saying, if LSU wins 10 games this year, you're a playoff team. And I'm not going to stick my nose up at that in the slightest. No, sorry, no, thank you. More mailbag questions coming up next after just a couple of quick words from our sponsors. All right, I have to tell you guys about Monopoly Go. So I've been told that I am a competitive person. I get it. I know it's true. Fine. Okay. Yeah, I know I have a competitive side, but look, we all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. And I'm sure you've probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. And it's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, and you can build up amazing cities that bring you big time money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like from the classic Monopoly. But now I can heist their vaults of riches for myself. The leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is, so that's what makes it so fun. That's where my competitive side comes out. And it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, I also want to tell you guys about Game Time. Honestly, Game Time is the very first place that I go to buy tickets for anything. Sporting events, plays, musicals, comedy shows, whatever it might be. And now Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. There's killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So I'm born and raised in St. Louis. I'm going home next week. Actually, I'm very excited. And while I'm home, I plan on going to a Cardinals game with my family. And I told my dad, hey, can we go to a Cardinals game? He said, yeah, I'll look into tickets. I was like, no. Don't worry about it. I'll do it because I'll do it on the Game Time app because I know that's going to be the best place for us to find tickets with great views and the best price. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, rounding out today's edition of a Locked On LSU Mailbag Wednesday. A little bit wordy there. I might have to work on condensing that a little bit. But this last question I picked because I just thought it was really fun. And there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer, at least now. I guess we'll find out what the real answer will be. But it was a fun exercise that honestly had me thinking for like a few hours after I read it. So that's exactly why I picked this one. In reference to LSU Gymnastics National Championship. If you missed it, LSU Gymnastics brought home their very first national championship in program history. After getting to the national championships 10 times in program history, finally, they were able to break through and bring home that trophy. So this question is, which LSU team do you think will win the next national championship? And I said a couple segments ago, I understand we sound incredibly greedy and incredibly spoiled talking about how 10 wins isn't good enough anymore. I sound spoiled again talking about, okay, all these national championships that LSU has won over the last calendar year. Now on to the next. But hey, again, welcome to LSU. That's the expectation. This was a really fun one. What team will win the national championship next? Before I get into my thought process, let me just say I know what I don't know. I understand that the LSU women's and men's golf teams are incredible and are, renowned across the country. Beach volleyball is the same way. That those teams are viewed as across the country as some of the top programs in their respective sports. I know that I don't know enough about the landscape of those sports outside of LSU for me to say they are absolutely a perennial contender or they're not, or they're 2 years away, a recruiting class away. Frankly, all of you LSU beach volleyball fans and golf fans out there, please feel free to educate me. But I'm going to go ahead and leave those teams out and focus in on some of the bigger sports, or at least, what we view as quote unquote bigger sports. So let's go ahead and toss out men's basketball because frankly, I don't think this men's basketball team is on a 1 to 2 year plan to win a national championship. Now, I do think eventually, hopefully, they'll get there. Hopefully, they'll break through. But I think that's more of like a 5, 8 to 10 year plan than it is okay, what are we going to do to win a national championship in the next 12 months? So let me just go ahead and toss men's basketball out. Let me focus in on baseball, football, women's basketball, gymnastics, since they just won a national championship, and softball. I don't think baseball's winning a national championship this upcoming season. I don't even think they're making the postseason. So let's go ahead and throw them out. Could they get back to where they were in the 2023 season in 2025? Sure, absolutely. I had a full breakdown of baseball after, first series SEC win of the season this past week. So you can find that on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube, but they're not winning natty this year. Next year, sure. Let's hold out a little bit of hope for next season. Kind of stinks that we're talking about next year in April. Like that's not the LSU baseball expectation, but I'll continue. I think the LSU team most poised and ready to win LSU's next national championship is women's basketball. And I know that they came off of a national championship last season. I know that they just lost a vocal leader and the face of the program in Angel Reese to the WNBA draft just a couple of weeks ago. I understand that. I understand that this roster is in a bit of a transition. That Angel Reese, who has been a foundational piece for Kim Mulkey over the past couple of seasons, she's not there anymore. I get that. I understand. But the reason I say LSU women's basketball is one, because it's already a proven commodity. Like we already know that Kim Mulkey can win national championships. So maybe that's lazy of me. But also I kind of subscribe to the belief of show me before I can believe it. That if I can see it, I'll believe it. And we've seen it with Kim Mulkey. Also, I look at this roster this upcoming season. You're returning 3 of your 4 leading scorers. Anissa Morrow will be back. Flau'jae Johnson will be back for her junior season. Michaela Williams will be back for her sophomore season. Samaya Smith is coming back from injury. So that's already 3, Anissa, Flau'jae, and Michaela, 3 starters that have plenty of experience and have become leaders in that locker room. Aaliyah Del Rosario coming back for her sophomore season. And then Kim Mulkey is also supplementing through the transfer portal. So this feels like a fairly healthy roster with a coach that's already won not just a national championship at LSU, but several national championships throughout her career. So I'm going to, and this might be the cop out answer. This might be the easy and obvious answer. So I'm going to go ahead and say LSU women's basketball. The reason why I'm not willing to say football is because I don't think that LSU football is there yet. And by there, I mean national championship contending, like actual realistic winning. Because I think it's harder to win a national championship now. You could say, well, it's easier because the playoff is expanded. Okay, but now you have to win more playoff games to get to the big dance. I don't think LSU is quite there yet, especially when you're looking at how much more difficult the league is going to get with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. I think Texas looks like a team that can contend for a national championship, mostly because they have two really solid quarterbacks in Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, and because they got to the playoff last year. And I know they lost some pieces, but Georgia also looks like a team that can contend for a national championship. Georgia has more continuity on that roster and within that coaching staff than I think any other team in the SEC. Now, I could be proven wrong there. I haven't done enough of the breakdown, but just off the dome, like that's kind of just feels like that's the case. So I think that there are too many teams standing in LSU football's way of winning a national championship this season. You see what I mean? I think that they're on the trajectory, and I think that LSU, the expectation maybe isn't fair. I think that it's fair to say that LSU could find themselves, that there is a clear path to the college football playoff for LSU football this upcoming season. But national championship, I don't know if I'm quite there yet. But until we see them against USC in September, we were more than happy to change our minds. I just don't think the defense is there. I don't think the defense is quite there enough, and Blake Baker and this entire defensive coaching staff's first season to be national championship contending. The offense, on the other hand, that might be a national championship offense. So I would love to eat my words. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU. Thursday night is the NFL draft. We'll see Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., more likely than not, walk across the stage in Detroit as first round pick selections. We'll do a full NFL draft breakdown, everything that you need to know to get you prepped and ready for LSU Tigers on NFL draft night. And we'll do that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.